Well, welcome back to today's session. Over the weekend, I was thinking of perhaps how best to encourage, particularly young men um, and women, especially those between the age of 18 up to about 35 for men, and between 18 and 27, particularly for women, and how to encourage anyone who falls within this group, especially in light of some of the things that I have been sharing over the last few months. And I thought perhaps the best way to deal with what has been in my heart, especially over the last 2 days, is to provide some encouraging words by talking about the importance of holding on to your dreams. One of the things that I have observed of late amongst young people, especially during my interaction over the Christmas period, is how much parents, either by omission or by commission, have done a disservice to young people, particularly their kids. And in this respect, I'm speaking specifically to the failure to paint a big picture for the kids, to paint a picture of inspiration, to paint a picture that the young child holds onto as they journey through manhood and womanhood, and as they go through what I think is life's adventure, the jungle of life. And this failure is something that I have seen in so many young people's experiences, in the failure to dream, the failure to know how to dream, the failure to dream big, the failure to believe in the dream even when obstacles present themselves before you. And so in today's session, I'd like you to take what I share as something that is coming from my heart, specifically because I know the journey that I have endured and the process that I also had to go through to get to where I am today. Now, let me say a few things before I begin. There is no need, irrespective of who you are, irrespective of your lineage, irrespective of the life circumstances you were born into, there is absolutely no need for excuses. In many ways, life deals cards to each and every person. We don't get to complain, we simply play the hand that we have been dealt. I say this simply because some people have been born lucky, and therefore the journey through manhood and womanhood is much easier. And some others have been dealt a different hand, which sometimes at the point in time when you are aware of the hand you've been dealt, you might think it to be a bad hand. I learned something from my experience that in life you are going to have good times and you are going to have bad times. But whilst you go through each, you may not be able to tell which is which. It often takes the wisdom of hindsight, of experience, to look back and recognize that sometimes what you may have thought to be a bad hand was actually a training ground for your future success. And sometimes what you may have thought to be an advantage could actually be a limitation if that advantage is not used wisely. Now, some people believe that in addition to having been either born in the wrong continent, born in the wrong location, born into financial circumstances that are different to what they would have wanted. Some believe that they've also had no guidance, either a poor parent, a bad father, a bad mother, and therefore part of the reasons they haven't succeeded has to do with the family. Let me also make that point again, no excuses. You can be a great father, like David, King David, and you can have an absolutely useless son like Absalom. So having a good father does not make life easy for you. It doesn't make you wise. You can also have an absolutely detestable father like King Saul, but have a wise son like Jonathan. So having a good father is no guarantee of your success, but also having a bad father should not be an excuse for your lack of success. Now, with that said, let me start today's session by simply trying to encourage you to live each day and live your life daily like the success you are going to be. Now, over the last few weeks, I have talked about the importance of putting your dream first. And I've tried to relate this from the context of relationships. For men, my recommendation has been very clear. Between 18 and 35, I have provided, or have tried to provide, a number of tenets to lead your life by. And for women, I have provided similar tenets to lead your life by. And the whole purpose is so that at a certain point in your life, you've achieved your dream. And then you can begin to experiment with life and take on more responsibilities, that at that point, your shoulders have been strengthened so that you can take that load. I have been recommending that you avoid any form of responsibility, especially relationally, because relationships, in my opinion, are dream killers. Relationships force men, young men, to become mature much faster than they should. In many ways, it's important to go through the organic process of growing rather than being thrust into growth too early. Now, for some of us, greatness, and I don't put myself in that category. When I say for some, I'm talking about everyone. Greatness is thrust on you. You don't get to choose. And therefore, you play the hand you've been dealt. For some other people, it's a process of preparing for that greatness. Every great person, when you audit their lives, what you find is a period of preparation, followed by a period of service. Preparation always exceeded the service period. When I talk about for men the importance of delaying relationships, especially between 18 and 35, the purpose of that is to allow you to prepare for the challenges, the opportunities, the obstacles, the adventures that life will bring to you much later in your life. If I go back to the early 20th century, and perhaps even up until the 1940s, the life expectancy for the average man was about 42 years. It was mid-40s. Most men got married at 25 on average. And so you had roughly 15 years, or at most maybe 18 years or 20 years to stay as a married couple before you died. Today, the average life expectancy for men is about 85 years. It's in the low 80s up to 85. And what that simply means is, if you judge by historic standards, you got married at 25 and you had 15 years, which simply meant you had more or less 1/3 of your life from the point you got married to live. Today, get married, most people are getting married much later, but let's assume you got married at 35. You still have at least 50 years to live. So 2/3 of your life is still ahead of you. Now, with that said, it's important to understand that your success is usually ahead of you than in your present. So you have to live, especially young men, you have to live each day believing in your future, believing that there's something that you will turn out to be. I have found, and from my experience, that it's important to travel light. Now let me use the analogy of traveling, because I think it's something most people can relate to. There have been times when I have traveled and I have refused, especially if it's a relatively short trip. Traveling to somewhere in Europe or traveling within Great Britain. I've intelligently made a decision to travel light by not having any luggage that I needed to check in before traveling. The reason was simple. You arrive at the airport, you have to check in. It takes time. You get on the plane, you arrive at your destination, then you have to wait for your baggage reclaim. Sometimes, depending on how busy the plane or the airport is, you could be waiting for up to an hour after landing just to get your bag or your bags. I found it to be a smarter way to take the most important things I needed, try to contain all of my necessities within a small cabin luggage. Therefore, I could walk to the plane directly, get off the plane and walk out of the airport with no delays. The same idea can be used if you're journeying from 18 years to 35 years. By traveling light, I'm referring to trying to keep your life, those who depend on you, to the minimum so that you can move. I have found in my experience, some of the opportunities that I have found in life have come because I wasn't rooted to one particular place. You and I are not trees. Trees, unfortunately, have the unfortunate disposition that they can only be where they have been planted. I was watching over the weekend. I saw at someone's place. I saw one of the episodes of Grand Designs. Really interesting episode. Two couples, they were building a new home. It was very challenging, beautiful scene, beautiful location somewhere in England. And as I watched the episode, what came to mind was two things. Both in their early 30s. Neither of them had achieved any of their dreams. Their dream was actually to build a house together. They were not married. They had borrowed all of this money to build this beautiful house, and the house was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But what came to mind was the tree concept. That in fact, what they were doing was planting themselves to one location. And by that, what I mean is, if an opportunity came for the man to travel to the United States, Australia, Canada, somewhere in the Middle East, somewhere in Oriental Asia, if an opportunity came, and if that opportunity could have led him on a path towards achieving his major dream, and let's say it was in the form of a job, a great position, great opportunity, he would have rejected that opportunity, having completed the house. So in many ways, the house had become a tree, fixing him, rooting him down to the soil. Secondly, he was in a relationship, far too young, both of them far too young, which meant there was another cause or reason holding them down to a particular location. And I thought to myself, and I said, well, this is partly one of the issues that young people have today. No one is encouraging them to travel light, to be adventurous, to seek for opportunities, to delay the planting of themselves down to one location, to one relationship, or to a relationship, at least before 35, and certainly before, delaying all of that until they've achieved their dreams. And the concept of traveling light came to mind, and the plane analogy, which is, it's important to stay light. Relationships hold you down. That doesn't mean relationships are not good. But at the wrong time, the right relationship can hold you down. At the right time, the wrong relationship can hold you down. So you're never going to get the perfect time. However, whilst we're not looking for perfection, what we're trying to do is ensure that you don't start too early and you don't give up on that dream too soon. In exchange for something that is so temporary, especially in today's times, something that is less meaningful, something that has almost no guarantees, it's important not to start too early. And my recommendation would be the same as I have provided in the prior sessions, which is between 18 and 35. We have to make some decisions in our lives that are very important. One is to be educated. Give yourself 5 years, 18 to 22, 5 years to get your college done and out the way. Included in that 5 years is 1 year perhaps for travel. So you begin at 23. 23, you have a focus, a plan to get to 10,000 hours of focused, deliberate practice. Constant, never-ending growth and improvement in an area of skill or gift, learning, apprenticing under a master, someone who is really good. 10,000 hour working hours is what we have come to learn as the minimum effort needed for you to become an expert in any walk of life. There are 2,000 work hours every year, therefore it will take you 5 years. From 23 plus 5 takes you to 28. Now, I usually say, well, men, unfortunately, we mature very, very slowly. So we don't travel in a straight line. We squiggle, we zigzag, and therefore allow a margin of safety of, say, 20%. That's another year. So that takes you to 29. So from 23 to 29, you've dedicated 6 years, focused on yourself, focused on your dream, focused on improving yourself. And that will get you up until 29. And let's say for whatever reason, things don't work out the way you expect. Maybe that you change jobs, you change locations, change mentors, and there's another 20% margin of safety needed. That's an extra year. Bang on, that gets you to 30. So at 30 years old, you relatively have just come into your place in terms of your competence in a particular area of skill, in a particular area of gift or talent or awareness. And that means at this point, you can begin the journey, which is where I think the journey towards manhood begins, from 30 to 35, which is a 5-year period for you to fail, to then pursue that passion you have, to pursue that purpose that you believe is your calling, to pursue those opportunities, that business, to become entrepreneurial, recognizing that you already have the foundation underneath as a safety net, which will ensure that you always have a career. So what we're looking here is, you're saying I've achieved my career. I have a foundation built under myself. I'm going to pursue my calling, something that I believe is something that can get me to my dreams of financial independence, of satisfaction, of blissfulness. But I have 5 years. And within that 5-year period is a period to fail. But it's also a period where I can entertain another woman present in my life, because she can be part of that process of me becoming the man that I should be at 35. If you can make it to 35, at 35 you're ready to start that decision of taking that responsibility of partnership and being a husband, cohabitation, having a girlfriend, having a mono relationship, being more responsible. And what this simply means is that in order for you to travel light, first you have to be an apprentice, and you have to apprentice under a master. That means you have to learn how to submit to a higher authority, someone above you. And that means that your time schedule becomes non-existent, because you're looking to gain as much wisdom and experience from your master. And that means you work to their schedule. Now, I use myself as an example. Between 23 and 30, I worked on average, say between 14 hours every day. I woke up at 5. I was in the office for 6, sometimes not getting home till very late in the evening. The reason I could do that was because I had the luxury of traveling light. So if I was in the office at 4:30 and my boss said, something has changed, we need you guys to work extra hours, I didn't have to pick up the phone and call someone to say, I'm sorry, honey, I can't make it home, because I wasn't married, I wasn't in a relationship, I wasn't committed emotionally with anyone. I could have made plans, but all I had to do was call or text and say, I've got to cancel. I was traveling light, but I was focused on my life and what I believed my success would be. Remember, I had no clue as to what the future would bring, but one thing I knew was that I was willing to play that card that had been dealt, play the card in the best way possible. First, you have to learn to submit. There are too many young people these days who want to go into their own business. You want to start a business once you have actually finished education. My recommendation is always delay entrepreneurship until your 30s for one specific reason. The skill of learning how to submit to another person is a fundamental skill you need in knowing how to lead other people. Usually once you've finished education, everything's theory. There is no practice. Now, Yogi Bear once said that in theory there's no difference between practice and theory, but in practice there is. You come out with all of these ideas and all these aspirations. You've learned the theory. Most people fail in business when they start a business, primarily because they do not have the basic skills of how businesses work. By learning to submit to another person, by working for a company, at least until you're 30, you learn how businesses work, how interpersonal relationships should work. You learn how the structure of a business works, the life cycle of a business, the key components of what makes a business successful. You learn how to fail effectively using other people's money and other people's resources, and you're paid for that failure or for that experience. By learning to submit, The gift you get is if you submit properly, with humility, the person you're submitting to transfers their wisdom to you. And in many ways, by working for someone, you learn how to actually start a business and how to manage and grow a business. Once you turn 30, that 5-year period is your period for adventure and trying different things. And what that means is, in order for you to be successful in this endeavor, you have to be selfish. You have to avoid what I call dream killers, whether that be male relationships or female relationships that potentially could sabotage your dream. Now, for so many young men that I see today, I'm going to use numbers, so this is perhaps easy to understand. At 22, there's a young girl who's 21 who went to the same college. You find her very attractive. Let's say, for example, she's a 9 or a 10 in beauty. She's desired by every person in your age cohort. She's also desired by the men who've been working for a number of years, men in their 30s, 40s. Now, women are generally drawn to resources. Therefore, at 23, you have no resources. You have absolutely nothing, except you've actually inherited wealth, especially compared in relative terms to men who've been working for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Unfortunately, for some of you, there's a comparability process taking place. You're comparing yourself to another man. And most of you make the mistake of sacrificing your future, your dream, your goals, simply because you're so bent on making promises that you cannot keep, promises that you don't have the ability to keep, the wisdom to know how to keep those promises. And unfortunately, such promises sometimes come in the form of a proposal, either to the woman, because you believe you might lose her. You've been dating her since college and you've just graduated, and you guys are about to go into the big world, and you're concerned, you're worried about losing her because you believe she's too beautiful. And you believe you're very lucky that she even chose you. You can't even believe that she's still with you. She wants to get married. She wants to start a family, and you say, fine, let's start. For some other people, some of you, the 9s and the 10s, who are the most attractive, find other men who can afford their beauty, which then leaves you with those who are the 6s and 7s, who are the next in line. Many of you have got no game. You don't know what it means to be a man. You've been raised in a community where the applaud of women, the affirmation, the attention is something that you crave beyond anything that you have or know. And so what do? You settle for the 6s and the 7s who will have you. The first girl who actually has sex with you, or who chooses to have sex with you, is you settle for her because you believe this is the best I can do. Understandably, you have nothing. So you're judging your life based on where you are. Rather than judging on your potential, you're judging on the actuality of where you find yourself. Unfortunately, you have nothing. Therefore, the way you see it, I have nothing. So I may as well take this woman who is a 7 or an 8, who is beautiful, and then you pedestalize the woman as the best prize you have, like a medal you have. The idea that a woman who is an 8, a 7, so beautiful, young, she has youth, beauty, can choose you and wants to start a family with you, you see that as your highest calling, to start a family, and therefore you give up on your dreams. You sacrifice, in many ways, you sacrifice the future for the present, without recognizing that your highest value is 10, 15 years ahead, and the women you can get when you get to that stage far exceed in beauty or attraction or whatever physical attribute that you might use as a yardstick, far exceed the women that you can afford at 22, 23. In any case, most of you sacrifice the future for the present. You choose a dream killer, someone who, from the moment you start the relationship, begins to give you reasons for you to kill that dream. You refuse to take that job abroad because you don't want to leave the woman you're dating. You refuse to work long hours because you want to avoid disputes and disagreements at home. People are asking why you're coming home late. So instead of working extra hours, which will enable you to position yourself for the promotion, you go for the easy route. You take things easy. So you give up on that dream. You give up on that opportunity simply because you want to keep her happy. Now here is where it gets really sad. The younger you are and the younger you get married, the higher the likelihood of a divorce. You've heard me quote some statistics where I've said about 50% of the marriages in the UK end in divorce. That number increases as the age of both parties decrease. So for those who get married at 22, 23, 24, the probability of failure goes from 50% up to about 70%. The average length of marriage for those who are getting married since, say, year 2000, say the last 20 years, is roughly 6.5, 7 years. Call it 7 years. So let's bring it back to where you are in the present. You're 23. You've given up your dreams. You've given up your future for a relationship that is average at best, because you believe it's the right thing to do, because you have nothing else to bargain with in terms of resources. At 23, that relationship will be ended, or will end, by 30. If you are also unlucky, you would have started a family. You might have kids, which then mean not only do you have your roots fixed to that soil, your roots are then fixed for the next 18 years because the kids then come first. Again, a decision that could have been delayed until 30, 35. But in many ways, you make that decision because the woman in question has a biological clock, and you don't. So you're reacting to what I call an unfair balance of power. At 23, she is at the peak of her beauty. She is at the peak of her reproductive value, her sexual marketplace value. If she's been trained well, she's at the peak, or rather, at a good place in a non-sexual marketplace value. And in exchange, she's trading that with you. And all you have to trade, if you're a man, is your economic intrinsic value, meaning resources, money, power, fame, influence, wealth. You have none of that. You have no leverage. So the balance of power is tilted on the woman's side, which means you accept whatever negotiation she puts on the table. She wants a family, she wants a home, she wants to start having kids immediately, and she wants the ring. You concede to all of that without realizing that in 7 years or thereabouts, the relationship will be over. But you would have been held down like a tree, and you will be held down for many more years beyond the end of the relationship, because you've made decisions that were very poor, primarily because you sacrificed the future for the present. So the important point I'm trying to make is to avoid dream killers. If you are a woman, avoid men. Avoid starting your life too early. If you are a man, avoid women and relationships and starting too early. Between 23 and say 35 for men, and between 23 and 27 for women, save as much as you can, work as hard as you can, invest always, build a safe haven, build a safety net. Invest in properties and invest in securities, stocks and bonds as you please. Invest in alternative assets if you have to. Most importantly, invest in yourself, your human capital. Now, let me start to bring today's session to a close by sharing something that I think relates to myself. My first major investment was in myself, my education. I took every single saving I had, plus borrowed money, and I moved away from my family. And this is partly why sometimes when I share these sessions, I know how hard it can be to make that decision, because I've lived, this is not something theoretical, I've lived that life. I moved away from my family. I moved to a location where I had no one, I knew no one. I took everything that I had, my life savings, and I said, I cannot think about the present. I'm going to invest this in myself, in my education, in developing myself, because I believe my future has potential. And I did just that. Delayed gratification is a skill set that I see that is lacking in so many young men and young women today. By making that choice, I accelerated my career path and opportunities, and by 30 I had achieved financial freedom, financial independence. I had reached the first milestone, which is 30. Now here's perhaps one of the most important parts of my journey as an individual. By 30 I was financially free. Between 30 and 35, 36, between 30 and 34, I was pursuing what I thought was my calling, my purpose, my dream, my next part in life. And it was great. I had a foundation built under me to support that adventure. I retired at 30, and I pursued a path that I thought was necessary. And this is where I say to young men, whatever your calling might be, you may not know what that purpose is. You don't choose it, you discover it, which means as part of the discovery process, you have to go on a process of adventure, trying things. By 34, I had got to the point where I had tasted what I believed was my next path, or the next pivot point in my life, taking me in a different direction. So, having trained as an engineer, having worked as an engineer, I decided to move into finance, which meant from 34 till for the next 4 years, or 3 more years, all I did was reinvest in myself. Finance and investing was something I believed was my next path, because I realized, well, I don't really enjoy the whole idea of working for money. But in order to understand how not to work for money, you have to learn the whole, what I call the game of money. You have to learn the game of money. And you have to learn it properly. So between 30 and 37, I had 2 things I was doing. I was combining my purpose with starting a new path. Learning how to invest, learning finance and investment. But guess what? Those 2 things was what I call my failure. Now, interestingly, there was a 4-5 year period where I learned that nothing is ever as it first appears. 23 to 30, success. Everything I touched was great. From 30 to 35, failure. I'm going to call it failure primarily because I was out of my comfort zone. I was trying new things, new adventures. I was finding new obstacles, new challenges. I lost my Midas touch. But I understood what my purpose was. I understood what my next goal was. I understood long term that the only way I could ensure that my future long term, not in the short term, long term, was going to be successful was I had to understand the language of business. I had to understand accounting, finance, and investments. So I had to retrain in those 3 areas. The point being, for 5 years, failure. I mean, absolute failure. Compared to the prior 10 years. I was only able to endure that phase for one reason, and one reason only. The foundation I had built between 23 and 30 was what kept me going. More importantly, because I was not rooted to any particular location, any relationship, in this particular case, I could afford to fail. Now, I know people, I have friends, who the moment they got married, they could no longer go on that adventure. And I understand that, because with families, you need to be stable, but you need certainty. I know people who had always had dreams of doing a certain thing. As soon as they had a child, got married, that was the end of that dream. Why? Because they couldn't fail. They couldn't afford to fail. They had mouths to feed. Now, in my case, during that 5-year period or 6-year period, there were times when I struggled. I slept on the floor, slept on the couch. In many ways, all I had to do was downsize my lifestyle, because it was just myself. When things were hard, I just learned how to live within my means. But I didn't have a responsibility for another person, for another human being. In this case, I'm not talking about family, I'm talking about specifically my own family. I didn't have that. And therefore, I could keep my face to the ground and say, listen, you're in your preparation phase. You're in the training ground for your next task. So keep your head down, stop looking up. The mud might smell, it might be wet, it might be uncomfortable, but this too shall pass. Most people who go into relationships too early do not have that luxury of saying, I'm going to allow myself to fail. Because by failing, if you are already married or in a relationship, one individual failure leads to the group failure. Whereas if you travel light, if you wait until you're 30 before you start a relationship, and if certainly you wait until you're 35 before you get married or before you start a family, you give yourself the opportunity first to develop a career, a profession, to make some money, to invest, to save, and that will then become the capital needed for the 5 years of adventure where you pursue your calling, your dream, where you try different things, you start a business. That was the case for me. I started a business, started a number of businesses, and guess what? It doesn't just work from day one. Some people get it lucky, but for many people it doesn't, which goes back to the point I made about learning to submit to another person. Go work for someone by learning mistakes on other people's currency, time, money, resources, know-how, so that when the time comes for you to take that lone position as a lone ranger, you have the maturity. And this is a word that most young men do not have. Maturity. You have the maturity, the emotional maturity to accept what I call the cycle of what's coming your way. Like the waves of an ocean. Problems will come, problems will come, problems will come, and occasionally you get a crisis. In that 5-year period, oh boy, did I have multiple crises. It was almost as though it was rather than problems, crisis, it was crisis, problem. And that alone, the only reason I was able to endure that phase is simply because I was traveling light. Now, many of you are familiar with this. You go on the plane and the attendants have to give their pre-flight announcement. And one of the things that always baffled me traveling was the instruction that in the event of an emergency, Even if you have a child, even if you have a wife, even if you have a loved one, it says, when the masks fall down from the ceiling, it doesn't say put the masks on the child or the person you love or the person you care about. It says put your mask on first before you help another. The point being, you cannot pour into other people what you do not have. And as a young man, in order for you to become successful in your family, you must have had enough pouring into yourself. That pouring comes in various forms, but one of the ways in which it comes is failure, learning about yourself, testing your limits, moving to the edge of your area of comfort, moving into discomfort, suffering, feedback. And all of those ingredients is what makes the man. So when we talk about manhood, manhood is not the size of your Jimmy. It's not how long you can last in a sexual encounter. Manhood is not how hard you can punch someone in a fight. Manhood is a combination of all of the life experiences, the curveballs that are thrown your way, for which you don't actually have an answer. No preparation has happened. It's like being a boxer, you know, the punches that knock you out sometimes are the ones you don't see. Manhood is actually taking those punches, getting knocked down. And you may have noticed this, if you get knocked down in life as a boxer, one of the advice your coach will tell you before you step into the ring is you have 10 seconds. Don't be in a hurry to beat the count, because the moment you stand up, 1, 2, 3, you stand, you're still unsteady. The person gets to finish you off. Stay on the ground, catch your breath, catch your focus, get your vision back. You still have 4 or 5 more seconds to go. Make sure you're on your feet at 8 to make sure you beat the count. Don't be in a hurry to get up at 4, because you get up too soon, you get busy, your center of gravity is still moving, you get knocked out again. That process of taking those shocks and taking the punches and standing up is what manhood is all about. But part of that process requires that you stay faithful to your dreams. And this simply means that in your interactions with women and in your interactions with other people, do something I have always done, which is don't lie. Do not tell or do not live a lie. Tell the truth whenever it's within your ability to do so, which usually is always. So in my interactions with people, especially relationally, I have always done my best to say, listen, this is where I think I am emotionally at this point. This is where I think I might be going in terms of my dreams. I don't tell what my dreams are. I keep that to myself. But I tell the people who I think are involved in my life and who are interested in being part of my future, I tell them, I think I have a dream. This is my dream. I think it's taking me in that direction. But I don't want to be held back, and I don't want to hold you back. So I am emotionally unavailable. I will be emotionally unavailable until 35. Interestingly, as soon as I turned 35, I remember it was almost 4 or 5 months into my 35th birthday, almost like a light bulb moment. It felt as though I started to see clearly. I knew I'd got to the milestone, and I said to myself, I think I could be ready. I could be ready, but I was able to look back and say, I understand why I needed to be so focused, so selfish, and so dedicated towards my calling and my goal. And perhaps that's what I'd like you to go away with as I bring this to a close. Relationships have a way of making you grow up. Taken too early, you grow up too soon. And therefore, it means you're not well rooted in the soil. You're not rooted. You don't have enough resilience and grit. You don't have enough strength of character because you've grown too fast. And that means when the wind comes, sometimes, if you're not well rooted, not always, but sometimes if you're not well rooted, it could blow you down. And so I would recommend that it's okay to be selfish. Don't underestimate who you could become. Don't underestimate what the future holds in stock for you. Don't judge your life based on where you are in the present. Always think about the future. Think about it in this regard. The past is a spent check. The past is gone. There's nothing you can do about the past. The future is a promissory note. Is yet to be spent. The present is all the cash you have. The intelligent thing to do is recognizing that you can't spend the past, is done already, but you can take some of the cash you have rather than spend. Remember, to spend something is to exchange without any expectation of a return. Whereas to invest is simply to transfer some of what you have now into the future with an expectation of a return. So save, take the cash you have, save, invest for your future. When you get to 35, I'll make this promise to you. And this promise, I've never found this promise to have failed. You will look back, like I have, at the women who were 7s and 8s who wanted you. You would look back at them and think, oh geez, wasn't I very lucky? Similarly, if you are, let's say, a woman 8 or 9, if you can wait until you're 27, what you will find out is at 28, assuming that's when you decide you're ready for a relationship, you will look back and say, wasn't I lucky? Because not only would you have achieved your dreams, not only would you have come into your sense of your womanhood, a sense of who you are, knowing what you're bringing into the relationship beyond just your beauty and your looks and your attractiveness, you'll get a sense of your destiny, and that the man himself does not make you. Marriage does not make you. You have an understanding about how special you are beyond just being a mother. And that means most certainly you will look back and say, oh boy, wasn't I lucky that I did not get married at 23? Because I'm a lot more mature, I'm a lot more intelligent, I've come into myself, I've achieved my goals, I have a good foundation, and I'm now a lot more wise in choosing a life partner. Now with that, let me bring today's session to a close and just think about all of what I've shared today. Delayed gratification is almost like a rarity in today's day and age. Now, in parting, at 35, you would still have 50 years as a man ahead of you. As a woman, if you get married at 30 or 27, you still have 50 plus years and more ahead of you. So just take it slow. Stop, pause, make the right decisions.